Dog days are here, and the dogs of war have come out to play. So it's time for us to take our first look at the desert dogs. One-page rules have just come out with the Jackals, a sci-fi faction of scrappy canines who live on quite an arid planet. Being a new army, I want to explore some color schemes for them, and want to take some influences from all the other desert dwellers I can think of to get these good dogs into good colors. To unify them a bit, I'm going to do all their fur the same. African wild dogs, or painted wolves, have just the right colors for desert dogs, I think. But I'm not in the mood to paint all those spots on what could be a rather large army. So instead I'm just going to take the colors and localize them a bit. A golden light fur for the body, something even brighter for the hands and feet, and then for the face, a nice dark snout and ear tips. I'm actually going to prime these guys with not just a black primer, but some red oxide mixed in as well. I'm going to want an overall warm tone, and by keeping the undercoat red, all my uncovered shades will have a hint of that oxide to keep the warm look, so it's just easier to do when priming. For the golden fur, I'm going to use my favorite yellow oxide, along with my red oxide again, black and white. If I went with just pure yellow oxide, it might be too golden, so I want to turn it more orange with that red oxide. Then a bit of black to darken it, and a bit of white to desaturate. I don't want to desaturate too much though to retain that golden color. I do have a few videos on how to paint fur, so I won't get too deep into that here, but since the Jackals are pretty small and they have so many auxiliary parts and things to keep things interesting, I'm not going to do too much work on the fur. It's just going to be a couple of coats for the main body, a bit darker shade of my mix for an overall texture, then do some highlight texturing with a midtone. For the hands and feet, I'll first use the dark shade from the previous mixes to rebase the hind paws, tail, and hands. Then start the fur texture with the mid-tone color. This will make the feet a little more brighter overall so that I can add some more white into the mix and create a much lighter highlight for a more overall look of a light beige. For the dark face and ears, I'm going to mix up some black and red oxide, just like I had for the primer layer, but with far more black, and also thin it out with some of my Max Matte Medium. I want the black to be a bit transparent because I want the texture I've already painted to show through some. So just some thin, even layers over his snout and ears. Last thing to do is just texture the black a bit more, using the same mix with a bit of the white, and add a few stray hairs here and there for the black fur. For the inside of the ear though, I do want it black since that's what the reference is, but with a bit more of a pink shade. So add white and a bit more red oxide to the last mix just to highlight the folds inside the ears. The quintessential desert style has to come from Tusken Raiders. There's a huge contrast between the dark brown of their bandoliers and the light beige of their overall cloaks. Some even having a lighter brown mixed into the belts and gloves. Overall a very brown palette, but one that should work perfectly on the desert dogs. For the beige, traditionally I would keep that to things like arm and leg wraps, but I think since I've made his hind paws lighter already, I'm going to make the bulk of his armor beige instead. To mix up the first layer for the beige, it'll be a lot of white, some burnt sienna, raw umber, then adding yellow oxide until I get the right tea-stained hue. Then base all of the armor with that mix, avoiding recesses. For a highlight, I just add more white since this is already a bit more saturated than it should be for the final, and pick out the more prominent areas where the light would reflect from. Then, to really get some contrast into a very light color, some pure white, just to highlight edges and ridges receiving the most light. For the light brown, this is what I want to do all the wrappings found all over this guy in. And since they're so small, it'll be quite easy to get done, starting with a mix of raw and burnt sienna and burnt umber to get the right hue. Then just base the straps on his hands, arms, and legs, but also the little cloth flap covering his tail. To highlight them, I'll just add white to that mix, generously too, since I want a large contrast here, and then use angles and texture to my advantage. angling the brush so that it's flat to the model so that I can pick out the raised edges of the reps, but then fill in some areas more as a highlight line. This is way too bright to finish with, of course, but that was planned, as the last thing I want to do is a final glaze with a mix of yellow oxide and burnt sienna, thinned with a matte medium. This should recolorize the white, add shadows to where it pools, and generally blend the whole thing together. The last color is the dark brown, and this one should be easy too since we know exactly where it's going on all the bags and belts. And because I don't feel like working too hard at the moment, I'm going in with a straight burnt umber to give me my base coat. In the references, it's more of a reddish dark brown. So next highlight is also an easy one, just a burnt sienna, stippled around pressure points like buttons and belts. I give this one a couple of passes since I really want some of that red to stand out when it comes to my final step, which is a bit of black gets mixed into the burnt umber and then thinned with some medium for an overall wash. I really want to keep the lightness of this down, especially in the shadows, so it stays overall dark. Were I to add anything lighter, I feel like it'd cross over into a neutral brown instead of a dark one. How about some modern desert soldiers this time, with some desert camo? All the plates and armor of the Jackal would make sense with some camo since they're in a sci-fi setting, and I wouldn't say it's too hard to actually do either. Though there will be one part that's a bit of a slog, which is to base coat, since it's my feeling that camo is always easiest to go from light to dark. So to start, I want a sandy color that's really bright, so lots of white, but some red and yellow oxide mixed in. These are the same colors I used to paint the fur, so this time I'm just going more heavy with the red so they'll appear different on the model. To start the camo pattern, I want my sandy color just a bit darker, so all I'm going to do is add a bit of black. It'll desaturate and darken. Then I apply it to the model by stippling in a little cloud area, leave a gap, and then stipple in another one. I want to cover about 50% of the area, so make sure lots of the lighter color is still showing. To darken the mix some more black, but with a bit more of the red and yellow oxide too, just to keep it more in the brown territory than a pure black would be. Then once again stipple large patches of this around the armor. I'll usually aim to start on something touching both the light and the medium color, then build it out from there, so that I'm covering roughly the same amount of each. Because camo is kind of a flat, even shading across a surface once it's in, it's the time to then actually highlight it. For the highlight, I'm just going to use a pure white and one of my fine point brushes, very carefully adding outlines to details along ridges and edges. This should bring back some of the definition so our eyes can see where things are. I asked a family member if they know of any characters that they like that come from the desert, and the first thing that popped into their heads was the Genie from Aladdin. So we're going with it. But a nice little pop of color could be exactly what we need. And it kind of makes sense, since they are scavengers. What they're wearing may well have been scavenged. So that's why I'm starting by painting the armor on this one a metallic, just a dark metal, because some of this is going to be peeking out as wear and damage. Genie's overall color is a nice blue, so that's what I'll be using as my paint color for the metallics. Not paint as in the paint I'm painting with, but in that he's wearing something that was painted blue but is now chipped and damaged. So that's why I'm starting with a dark blue made with a phthalo blue, white, and black for opacity and a bit of desaturation, stippled over the surface of the metal, but staying away from the edges and some randomly selected areas. I'll mix up my last two mixes here at the same time as they kind of come together as a package deal. I want to make a medium, but still vibrant blue, so mix white into the phthalo blue. But I also want an in-between with the black in it, so still add some to what I just made for the medium shade. I'll use this medium shade to stipple inside where I painted the dark blue. The goal is to leave a little bit of that dark shade as a little barrier between this new blue and the metallic, giving the effect of a chipping paint. Now what to do for the light blue that I already mixed up? I'm just going to use that to highlight the blue paint as though it wasn't being chipped away. So find the light points and blend it towards them so it'll get some brighter spots among the blue. Lastly, just to highlight some of the more banged up metallic parts, I'll throw down a lighter metallic silver and use this just to pick out some highlight edges on the exposed metal parts. But it's also a good opportunity to add in some small scratches and re-reveal some of the edges that may have gotten covered by the blue that shouldn't have been. Since these three are going to be a unit, I wanted to make sure to keep a lot of the similarity between them, so use the same colors for the wraps, belts, and bags. I really like the variation between light and dark shades on the overall model, so even though they're mostly just browns, each part still feels separated out quite well. And by only varying the armor colors, I could possibly get lots of individuality into even more dogs, but still have them be a cohesive army overall. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this one, or just other fun things to do with painting miniatures. And until next time, enjoy your own painting journey.